try and share with you is my own excitement about Karl Marx in terms of areas that perhaps are not as well known. Karl Marx, a journalist, if you like, Karl Marx, the Hegelian, of course well known, but there is this whole epistemological divide between the early Marx and the late Marx, which Althusser, I think, was seen as responsible for somewhere in the 1845 or 46. And there is a school of thought that the later Marx is all that is important and the early Marx is perhaps not as important as the later Marx. That is now being, I think, revised or questioned, because a lot of early Marx has gone naturally into later Marx. That's a truism. But more importantly, I think several aspects of Marx have been very, very important in readings of the early Marx. Marx as a journalist, for example, and Marx's the importance of his Feuerbachian tradition of Marx and Feuerbach, and the whole look at religion at a time when we are despairing about the role of religion in society, the kind of role that religion is playing in society. I think revisiting Marx and looking at the Feuerbachian tradition and what is the essence of Christianity and how this was imbibed by Marx and how he used it in his own philosophical worldview might be an interesting thing to look at. The Hegelian Marx, the young Hegelian Marx, I think again probably needs to be looked at afresh. These are my personal takes on this. So this whole contradistinction that's made, if you like, between the economical and philosophical manuscript of Marx dating of 1844 and contrasting that, as has been done, I think traditionally in scholarly circles as well, with Das Kapital Volume 1, which was written in 1867, published in 1867, or again his writings on the freedom of the press, which I find, which are voluminous to begin with and very, very significant, contrasted with the 18th Brumaire of 1852. Those writings of the press were a decade earlier, in 1842 onwards, about 1842s. And in 1852, of course, he writes the 8th Brumaire, and so these are contrasted. So this epistemological divide, which is placed somewhere between 1845 and 1846, where Althusser says that the German ideology was perhaps the kind of the body of work which separates the two Marxists, is itself, I think, a point that we need to interrogate. Is itself a schema, if you like, that we need to interrogate. Since I'm a journalist and I'm a media practitioner and now into media education, I'm naturally tempted to reflect very briefly on Marx as a journalist and how that has tended to be overlooked, if you like, or glossed over in an estimation of Marx, because nobody has written as eloquently about freedom of the press, in my opinion, as Karl Marx. That might come across as rather paradoxical, because we have not had societies which owed their ideological inspiration and allegiance to Marx being representative of freedom of the press. For reasons which are, I think, different and which need perhaps a separate session, socialist societies have been seen as being rather impatient with the concept of freedom of the press, and socialist societies are synonymized as societies where there is no freedom of the press. There is a kind of autocracy, if you like, in terms of information, of the information regime. There may be historical context for that. I personally think the war communism context itself tended to vitiate this whole problem. And there was a context there why freedom of the press was perhaps not as relevant or as important in a war communism situation. And therefore, how it panned out is a different discussion altogether. But what it doesn't take away from is the very categoric, extensive work that Marx has, and time and effort, and that Marx has devoted to freedom of the press. He writes voluminously about it. Of course, his own life is exemplifies a person who fought for the freedom of the press. As we know, he was the editor of the Rheinische Zeitung, in the Hungarian Empire, and then of the Neue Rheinische Zeitung. He was attacking the state, the Austro-Hungarian, the emperor and the state, and he had to flee from there to Paris. He literally had to live in exile because of his journalistic writings. And from there, of course, he had to again move on to London. And a study of his journalistic writings, and then he was the chief of bureau of the Tribune, the New York Tribune of Europe. He was the chief of Bureau of Europe of the New York Tribune. And he's written about a vast variety of subjects, from issues in Asia to China to Japan to Spanish War, what's happening in Spain and so on and so forth. So that I think, has obviously telescoped and come together and filtered into both the Communist Manifesto, where there are no names or places, it's more generalities, and Das Kapital itself. So without Marx the journalist and the kind of engagement that he had as a scholarly journalist, that was a kind of journalism, a qualitative journalism, which perhaps we don't get to see these days, too much these days. There would not be, I think, the Communist Manifesto or Das Kapital. As we know, Marx the Economist, Marx came to economics itself rather late, but of course he mastered the whole discipline of economics, as the best of economists today will admit and will celebrate. So this, I think, is the fascinating intellectual range of Marx, and therefore I think, just as in Gandhi we say that his being a journalist is what made him the political activist. He himself admits in his autobiography that his writing in the Indian Opinion, one of the several journals that he edited, was what his own dialogue with his own writing and his own reflection on it, his own kind of dialogue with it, is what enabled him to conceive of the idea of satyagraha as a political weapon. It's a unique political weapon. Satyagraha is not just non-violence. Satyagraha is a more evolved and sophisticated and activist concept. So Gandhi, the satyagrahist, if you like, evolved from Gandhi, the journalist. So I see parallels of that kind with Karl Marx as well. So that's really all I thought. I just try and evoke the full persona of Marx in terms of the myriad, the applications of his mind, and it must have been. It's a phenomenally fertile and phenomenally versatile kind of mind and persona. I will just end by saying that how fiercely Marx was committed to the freedom of the press is seen from, he says at one stage that censorship can never be legitimate even if it is a law, just as slavery can never be legitimate even if it is a law, because in his time slavery was the law. So he was saying that slavery can never be legitimate even if it's a law. Similarly, censorship, what he means is press censorship, can never be legitimate even if it is a law. So that is Marx speaking about freedom of the press. In our understanding of socialist societies, of course, there's a whole erosion of that concept, and that is the kind of hiatus that I think we need to understand today when we look back on this initial inspiration for what we commonly understand was the genesis, or the first kind of opening, if you like, intellectual opening to an era of socialism. Thank you very much, and with these few words, I invite Professor C.P. Chandrasekhar on behalf of CREST and the Chinta Ravindran Foundation to deliver the first of the two lectures today on Revisiting Capital in the Age of Finance, 150 Years of Das Kapital.